Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. We've recently launched our Patreon page, which can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, it's an easy way for those who are interested in this show to help out by simply pledging a small amount each month in sponsorship. Now that could be as little as $5 a month, which is about £3.80, or as much as you like. You will enable us to dedicate more time creating more content to help you, including videos, more blog posts, and even more shows. So if you can, head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon and get involved. In this episode, we speak to Ed Yau about bots. Ed has spent almost 15 years in software development building different styles of enterprise IT systems. He enjoys new opportunities that Agile, DevSpecOps and Cloud give for creating readily scalable, secure systems quicker than ever before. He's really excited about the potential for machine learning, cognitive and bot technologies, which look to deliver more intelligent user experience for applications. In an area still very new and shiny, Ed is here today to share his experience and knowledge of bot technologies. So thanks for coming on The Cynical Developer, Ed.
No worries. You're welcome, James.
Yeah, good. So we'll dive straight in with the questions, and we'll hit it off with what are bots?
Well, that's a good question. It's an area that's very much still evolving. I think different people have different definitions. My personal definition, I think it's the clearest one that I can think of, is that a bot is, or a chatbot is any UI that is conversational in nature, so it can be either text or speech based. So think Siri, Cortana, those I would describe as very early versions of bots that simply obey commands, whereas the sort of bots we're seeing now are more conversational. You can do backwards and forwards questions, and I think the mistake that a lot of people make when they think about bots is they think of them as entire applications by themselves, but I sort of view them really as, at the very simplest level, just a very novel text-based UI. So I see the chatbot bit as just being another front-end technology that overlays, any type of back-end system that you're used to working with already. So if you sort of go back to Siri, when you ask it to play a music track, the front-end technology, if you like, is the natural language processing bit that interprets your command, translates it into an intent, and then it starts your music app. So from a back-end perspective, this isn't really much different from getting a user click on a button. And another bit is obviously that text speech translation. So if you look at some of the other technologies that are usually applied with bots, things like machine learning, these things make the bot appear to be more. Actually, these same technologies are already in use. So, for example, when Amazon changed the recommendations, that's all been driven by machine learning. So in my mind, the characteristic that's really unique is that text UI part. Does that make sense to you, James?
Yeah, it does, yeah. Way back when, I had a Nokia N-Gage phone, and there was a game on there. I think it was a snowboarding game. I can't think what it was called. And that had a bot in it, and that you could talk to. Right. It was like going back to the chalet afterwards, and you could talk to her, and it wasn't very good, but I know, as a kid, what you do, you swear at them and things like that, and it would get offended and stop talking to you and stuff like that. But that's sort of really most of my exposure to bots for a very long time, until the likes of Cortana and Siri that are out there now. So we touched on the fact there that they can be used as chatbots and things. Are there any other applications that bots are being used for at the moment?
Well, I think really it's in that kind of text-based mode that people are using bots for. But all the main bot frameworks have connectors to things like Facebook Messenger, Skype, Slack, WhatsApp, and web-based instant messaging. So those are all examples where you can easily connect a bot, and it would behave in a similar way to Siri or Cortana, potentially using the same sort of technology in the back end. So those are obvious places. But one of the kind of buzzwords that gets bandied around a lot at the moment in business is disruption. So bots are often described as a disruptive technology. A lot of press is coming from young startups who want it to use it to disrupt the industries that they're trying to break into. And to explain this, let me tell you about an article I read recently that argued that companies such as Amazon, Uber, Airbnb, the single most important reason apparently why they've been successful in kind of getting so big and disrupting their industries as they have is the value that they provide to their users is actually in the time savings rather than anything else. So if you want a book, you don't have to drive to your nearest bookshop anymore, get it on the shelves and drive home. All you do is you simply load the Amazon app on your phone, find the book, order it on Prime, same day delivery, and it's kind of on your kind of desk almost straight away.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the value in a bot to compared even to an app. So imagine if you didn't have to install an app in the first place, you don't have to go to at the App Store to get your Amazon app. You're straight into your Skype. You want a book. You might be on the Amazon Skype channel, but 3 messages later you could have your book.
Yeah, that sounds good because I've seen that Amazon have got the little buttons that you can buy. I think they're something like £4 or £5, and you press it and it reorders your stuff. Which I've sort of thought, why would I bother to do that? Because I can just go into my app on my phone and do it. But that takes it to the next stage. Whereas I've run out of coffee for my Tassimo machine or washing powder or whatever.
Yeah.
I just whip my phone out and say, "Hey Amazon, order me some more coffee." And you're talking to the bot,
exactly.
and it could go and order it for you.
Exactly. So it's removing barriers, and it's saving you time, and that's why I guess people are excited by bots because they've got the potential to save people a lot of time.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. What are their limitations at the moment? What things are stopping them at the moment?
um, I think it's the level of the technology that you've got in the bot frameworks at the moment. I mean, there's bots are making quite a lot of noise in consumer brands, and that's where the buzz seems to be right now. So, but I think what people are finding is that the bots that they're having a go at aren't particularly well designed, and they're probably a touch more hype than reality. And that's the way I'd sort of describe where the bot space is. If you sort of imagine that, say, even 18 months ago, you'd have to be a bot researcher to really be playing with a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
It's sort of like if you go back that far, it's sort of like the internet in the 1990s. So the websites that you sort of saw in those days, on AOL and Alta Vista, those were websites. They did a job, but the sort of websites that you've got now are a million times better.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'd say some of those early bots were almost as primitive as some of those. But then the sort of learning behind those is obviously feeding into better bots, better design bots, which are being used for better use cases. So the limitations I see really are that the technology still is in many cases still quite primitive, in that you've got relatively crude tools, and if there is kind of machine learning, it's machine learning at a fairly basic level, and it's nowhere near a sort of human level intelligence AI. So that's sort of where the limits are. But if I sort of go into the architecture of an average bot and I sort of skim it out a little bit so that the listeners can understand what makes a bot tick, and then we can sort of go through each
definitely.
of the components.
Yeah, sure.
Where the limits are right now. So probably I'd imagine that most bots have 5 main components. So number 1 is a natural language processing unit, an LP, which parses and interprets what you're asking for. Second part might be a sort of conversational flow, so some sort of component which determines what state you're in, what state you're going to next. So some sort of state machine ultimately. And some sort of optional component which could do some work, call a web service, so some integration plugin. Fourthly, something which sends a response back to what a user's asked for. So that actual UI layer that comes back at you, that text. And then the last thing is probably, you know, some kind of component which keeps long-term states and context. So if you come back to a bot, well, it sort of knows you, it remembers you talked to it before, and it stores some sort of history of what you've done with it, what you've asked for, you know, what your shopping habits are like, what sort of mood you were in before. So it can give you a really good contextual response when it sees you next. So you know that's all a bot is to me anyway. So underneath it, there's no magic. So if you sort of consider each one of these components, I guess we'll sort of see where the edges are on them, if you like, where they're still
Okay.
not really smooth. So in terms of the areas of bots that need the most work at the moment in the current frameworks, these are the NLP component and the conversational flow component. 'Cause everything else is fairly standard in systems these days. So you know, a system that every system has um, a component that will keep states and context. That's effectively just a database. And every system will have integrations into other web services, and how you choose to do that is up to you. And the reason why the NLP bits need so much work right now is because these are the bits that are unique to your application. So they require developers to train the bot up in all different possibilities ultimately that a user might want to ask, interpret that in a smart way based on the current context, and to flow the conversation in a natural, appropriate way. So I think the biggest mistake I've seen from most novice bot builders is they never sort of think about the conversation flow, and they almost get overexcited by the framework and start just building stuff without really thinking about the purpose behind it. So you kind of end up in a situation where you've taught your bot how to understand some intents, but you probably haven't thought about how you kind of adapt to the fact it's bot technology now, and not just like a static form that you're dealing with. So maybe you haven't given the bot any sort of personality,
Yep.
but makes use of the technology. So sure, it's there to collect information ultimately, and to sort of help the user get a service. But if you've just basically done it as like an HTML form, then they're not benefiting from that experience any more than them using a form.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of developers get away with using developer speak in forms, but really, when they do a form, it should be in a more Joe Public, nicer, friendly, user friendly way. But when it
Yeah.
comes to stuff like bots, if it's not in that user friendly, real fluid, natural language, then people are going to find it very hard to understand and very hard to use.
Yeah, exactly. So I think so. Some of these things make bots quite a frustrating experience for users, and I think there are quite if you look around and play with some of the bots that are out there right now, they're not that well designed, and that's one of the reasons why they're yet to kind of fulfill their kind of initial hype. But one of the trends I've noticed recently over the last few years is generally the increased prominence of UX and front end on all projects. Not just projects where you want a really flashy front end, because you have to think about your user now if you want to create a good application, and building a bot is completely the same. So
Yeah.
just because your primary tools aren't Photoshop, CSS, HTML, JavaScript doesn't mean that you can skip that kind of UX, or well, I think I would call it CX, conversational experience, but
Sure.
really it's all the same thing. It's user experience at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So, because of these little pitfalls that we've got at the moment, is it mostly the techie communities that are using them, or are they out there with the general public? Now, I know you've said like the likes of Amazon are using these to some extent, but I guess that's more machine learning that they're using, really.
Um, no, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I look around for some stats, and one stat I managed to find was in a journal called Business Intelligence. It's an American business journal, beginning of the year, where they did a study on lots of different demographics, but Generation Xers, the people between 35 and 55, they had a graph in this that showed that 6% of this generation had interacted with chatbot already.
Yeah.
And I find that really significant because that generation's not the generation you expect to kind of be the most tech forwards. So one of the reasons why I think that this is that um, the chatbot is a technology that actually lowers the barrier for using technology. In so much the fact that people just think they're using a messaging app. There's kind of no forethoughts required and no kind of thinking involved to kind of go there.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and they are quite handy and things like that. I know I used to work in the freight industry, and one of the developers there developed a Twitter bot. This was before the likes of the frameworks that are out there now, and you could get quotes and things for it for sending parcels all over the world, and that was really handy and that was really quick because you would literally just send them a tweet saying something along the lines of, I've got a package that I need to send to America, say, and it's a 2 kilo box, and it might come back to you and say, well, what size is it? Or if you'd given the size, it could give you a price straight off, and that was really interesting.
Cool. No.
So why all of a sudden is this sudden surge in interest in bots? Because they've been around for quite a while. They've not been very good, and they're still not that great yet. Is it just that
Yeah.
it's the coolest thing to be playing with at the moment? Is it
Uh,
the new buzzword?
uh, Partly. I think there's a few different factors. So I think you're right in saying that the bots go back a long way. So actually, the first AI bots were developed in 1960s, believe it or not.
Right. Okay.
There was a scientist called Joseph Weizenbaum, who, I don't know if I pronounced his name right, by the way, who developed an AI psychologist called Elisa. And then in the 1990s, a competition called the Lubner Prize was started, which is an annual competition for the best chatbot, in effect. So, given that these things have been going on for ages, what's suddenly changed? That's what you're asking, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
For me, I think it's three things, and it's a combination of three different factors. So, first of all, the big tech companies have really started pushing it. So, 2011 was when Apple launched Siri, believe it or not. But last year at the Microsoft Build conference, Satya Nadella, the Microsoft CEO, stood up in the keynote speech and said, bots are the new apps. And when the CEO of Microsoft says that, every developer suddenly takes notice, don't they? And the same year, Facebook launched their messenger chatbot platform, and also Amazon launched Alexa. So three big tech giants, all of a sudden, bots are cool, and everyone starts looking at it. Secondly, chat apps are taking over our lives. I don't know if you noticed, but things like WhatsApp, Slack, Skype, Facebook Messenger, they're kind of there, and they certainly weren't there for me 3 years ago. And in China, this company called WeChat is massive.
Right.
And I think Western companies are looking over there and realizing what they're missing out on, because WeChat, sort of, I describe it like the Chinese WhatsApp. But if you actually look at the stats that The Economist published recently, they've got something like 65% of the users of WhatsApp.
Right.
But in terms of their mobile revenues, this number is astounding. They're earning 35 times more from that, and
Okay.
they've kind of found a way to really make money out of chat, really.
Yeah.
And in China, mobile web is actually a lot smaller than it is over here, and predominantly everything's chat based. So I think if you're a WhatsApp, you go, well, we could copy some of that and make a lot more money than we do now. But another stat I saw also was that apparently for UK consumers, Um, in terms of 1,000 people surveyed, 73% said that web chat is actually their preferred channel for customer service now. They prefer it over email because email takes too long to get a
Yeah, yeah.
response. Um, and they prefer it up to the phone because when you phone, you have to wait ages in a queue, in a call center somewhere. And, by the time you got through, you've probably forgotten what you wanted anyway. So
Yeah,
my
I
analysis
can
is
agree
that,
with that one. It's
um,
whenever I've got an issue, I would prefer to jump onto one of those live chats and talk to somebody, or up
yeah,
here
something,
to talk to
yeah.
somebody and get it resolved there and then.
So, when basically web chat is the dominant communication channel, bots are perfectly placed to kind of handle and be part of that. And the third factor that I've identified really is that we've just hit the sweet spot really with cloud technologies where the big cloud providers like Amazon, Azure, they've sort of started off in the IaaS layer really, 5, 6 years ago. And now they're moving more into applications as differentiate their services. So they're making the sorts of technologies that are really useful for building bots. Things like natural language processing in the cloud and cognitive services in the cloud, available to developers for a very low price. These are sort of things that 5 years ago would have taken a serious researcher weeks to get anywhere, and you can sort of get going as a a newbie in half a day to a day, and you've got something quite good with just bolstering together lots of cloud services. So
Yeah,
that's
yeah. I
that's
think
that's sort of the turning point because building a bot is now economical for most teams, whereas a few years ago it just wasn't.
yeah, and to set up the sort of system that had the resources to do all that computation would have cost you an absolute fortune to put together a server at home to have a play around and build something. Whereas because it's up in the cloud, you connect to it, you use it for a few hours, and it costs you a couple of pounds or dollars, depending on where you are, and then you turn it off, and that's it. It's away you go.
Yep, exactly.
Sure. So we touched on the fact that bots really link into machine learning, but how do they come together?
Okay. So for very simple bots, I don't think there is any need for any machine learning. So if I sort of recap to the components we talked about before, um, the two parts where you would perhaps put an element of machine learning is that human interface elements of the natural language processing. Um, you know, that's effectively understanding what someone's saying to it and trying to figure out what you want. So you can imagine that that's quite a hard thing to do. Um, so there's been quite a lot of machine learning work done by Microsoft, amongst others. I mentioned Microsoft because I've been working quite a lot of that framework recently. But all the big tech companies, IBM, Amazon, they've got similar technologies where they're able to sort of recognize intent out of text
Right.
just by having analyzed millions and billions of examples of text.
So they've already done all the heavy lifting and things for
Yeah,
you at that point,
ultimately.
so you don't really need to do
So
anything now.
I don't, although machine learning is banded around a lot, um, to kind of use these technologies doesn't require someone to have a PhD in machine learning anymore because ultimately these frameworks have abstracted it away all the way down from the theory to a point where you just click on a few buttons and teaching these systems through examples.
Right. Okay.
Um, so the other part where you could put a bit of machine learning is the part which decides what action to perform next, that conversational flow component.
Yeah.
So that isn't an area that a lot of people put a huge amount of effort into. I think most of the frameworks that you've got at the moment really kind of expect you to almost script that flow yourself. Um, and we'll talk about, I guess, why that might be better. but it's fine. It works for most applications, and you know, I mean, and I've not really seen an application that really it requires a huge amount of machine learning in that area.
Right. Okay. So, what risks and dangers are there around for bots and maybe mixing bots with machine learning?
Um, I would. Okay. You concentrate on the machine learning bit, but I would sort of frame this by asking you what are the risks around any software system, um, and look at that first, and then dig into what new risks do we see with bots in particular.
Yeah, sure.
So with any system, you've got your operational, your security risks. So if you're doing DevOps, if you're doing automated testing, you should be doing that for your bots as well. Because underneath, ultimately, your bot is just another web API that your chat app is connected to, and one that is collecting lots of personal data.
Yeah.
So you need to make sure it's secure. You need to make sure it's compliant with the data laws in your country. And one of the things I noticed in this year's proposed OWASP top 10, it's not even out yet, but you can get it on the website. Right at the bottom of the top 10 is a new entry called under protected API. So it's kind of leading down this path, isn't it, where people have got lots of these APIs out there. They haven't got proper authentication on them, and you can just get data in and out as much as you like.
Yeah.
So
I suppose that security could be the the latest big website has lost all its customer data. And how did that happen? Well, somebody logged onto the chat and said, "Hello, chat. Can I have all your user information?" It went, "Oh, yeah, I know that. I'll send it to you."
exactly. So but if you kind of so I think because it's so mystical and it's chatbots and people forget that it's just another IT system. That's the danger, isn't it? That
Yeah.
they forget to do what they normally do. But if you're talking about bots in particular, it's about how you actually police what AI is doing. So if you're just isolating the AI to kind of understanding what someone wants, and then you're scripting how that plays into everything else, that's probably fine. That's rarely safe. But if you're kind of putting more machine learning into that conversational flow, then that's where I think you can get into trouble. So I read a quote from Elon Musk where he said, "AI represents a fundamental risk to the existence of civilization."
Well, that's quite scary.
That's scary, isn't it? So someone you think would be wary about technology, but I think his viewpoint is that okay, there's a lot of AI research going on, but it's not regulated. So from his perspective, it's a bit like being in the Wild West because you can do whatever you like, whenever you like, and you're not really accountable.
Yeah.
But there's a recent example from last year when Microsoft were trying to publicize a lot of this technology when they put up a machine learning bot called Tay. So within 24 hours, literally, people had corrupted it. So they sort of programmed this innocent young girl character, and within 24 hours, apparently loved Hitler. It was promoting incest, and it claimed that Bush caused 9/11.
Nice.
So
Nice.
in 24 hours. So you sort of see that if you build a bot without any safety barriers, you're going to have some problems at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. You could end up with Hal on your hands, and you'd be locked inside your house, or
Yeah, exactly.
have a
So
million odd packages turning up at your house from Amazon because you upset the bot on their website.
yeah, exactly. So the sort of fears that people have around AI are similar to kind of overall the fears that you have with bots if you kind of push the AI to that level where without any safeguards.
Yeah. Okay. So, what's out there today if I wanted to get started with building a bot?
There's lots. There's like 100 frameworks,
Right. Okay.
literally, and there's sort of and the most suitable framework for you on your project really depends on your sort of requirements. So the ones I've looked at and dabbled with are things like Chatfuel, Motion AI, IBM Watson Conversation, Amazon Lex, and Microsoft Bot Framework. I've sort of listed them in a fairly specific order in terms of involvement from a development perspective. So, the one end of the scale, Chatfuel was effectively a drag and drop approach to building a Facebook bot, and you can only do Facebook bots, and you kind of create recognition blocks and conversational flows without any dev skills. You don't need any dev skills, and it works. It works
Yeah.
okay. Obviously, there are limitations, how far you can go with it. And sort of the other end of the scale, probably the Microsoft bot framework is the one that is, I'd describe as the most code first in terms of building bots. In that Microsoft are very, and the Microsoft have quite an opinionated approach to it. So they've given you a bunch of approaches in the box, and you're kind of there to find the best one for you.
Right.
So, the best variant for you sort of depends on how comfortable your team is with code, and kind of where your project is going, because, and there isn't really a one size fits all solution, I don't think, right now. I know obviously if you kind of go to Microsoft, they'll say Microsoft is best, and you go to someone else, they'll say their framework is best. But I think it's just what they suit, and from playing with them all, I'm sort of feeling that some of these suit different styles of bot. So if you're kind of more interested in the kind of flow of it, really interested in a framework which provides that flow in the box really easily. Whereas if you want something that is all about recognizing different intents, and being able to kind of do really complex things with those, then you want something that's a bit more code based.
Sure.
So that's my take on it. So at some point, I'm planning to write a good blog article to kind of contrast these up on the current state of play. So,
sure.
And I know this space moves incredibly quickly, but there don't seem to be a lot of critical articles out there at the moment. Everyone's kind of already on someone else's team. They don't kind of no one wants to stand back and look at and assess the scenery.
Yeah, sure. So really, there's the very simple to the complex out there in the frameworks, and it's going to be a case of suck it and see for a lot of it, and what you really need out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm a .NET developer by day, so I'm a little bit biased and bit of a Microsoft fanboy, I guess. So
yeah,
we'll concentrate on the Microsoft bot framework, because I know that's been shouted about a little, or quite a lot in the in the industry at the moment. So could you go into a little bit more detail about what Microsoft bot framework is?
Yeah, sure. So Microsoft Bot Framework launched March 2016, and as you said, the community around this has been growing quite a lot relatively recently. So really, the main bits you get in the box, the Microsoft Bot Framework, I sort of list them. So you get an SDK for your favorite programming language. So popular choices are JavaScript or C Sharp. By the sounds of it, James, you'd prefer probably more the C Sharp approach.
I do a little bit of JavaScript as well. Full stack developer, as a friend of the show pasted me as.
Full stack these days.
Yeah,
just depends which end of the stack you prefer, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. But Paul Seal from codeshare.co.uk did a video, and he claimed that there are no full stack developers. And then we went to a hackathon together, and after that, he put an apology video out saying, "I've met a full stack developer."
Excellent. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Anyway, back to the bot framework.
Yeah, sorry. The SDK comes with Visual Studio templates to get your bot up to a flying start. And overall concepts between all the kind of different programming languages are fairly similar, but the code obviously will look completely different. So as well as that, you get some fairly decent online documentation from Microsoft. Although I have to say some of their examples aren't necessarily real world. They're very noddy. But to get you going, they'll be fine. But
very MSDN-esque.
To anything difficult, you kind of still a bit on your own, and with working through it with the rest of the community. So the third thing you get a sort of local bot emulator, so you can fire it up and pretend that you're on Skype talking to your bot and see what the responses look like, just so you don't just so your feedback cycle is a bit easier. You have to redeploy every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Once you made a change in your code. And then I what I best describe is you get a basket of different technologies in Azure that are very complementary to the bot framework, which I'll sort of skip along as we go, but try not to overload people too much. So you've got something called Q&A Maker, Lewis, Azure ML, cognitive services, Azure functions, and logic apps, which all these things you could be used to play some part in a bot if you wanted to, and really whether you choose to use them or not depends on how complex your requirement is, and obviously how scalable your system wants to be, and all these different factors that you'll consider when you're building a system.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so I'll talk a bit about the C# version of the SDK because that's where I've been spending most of my time with the bot framework.
Yeah, sure.
So getting started is literally a breeze. You kind of just go to the Microsoft Bot Framework website, download it, install it, and hey presto, it's done.
Right.
So it is that simple. Unfortunately, it's not on NuGet, which I found a bit odd, but maybe I'll fix that at some point.
Yeah.
Um, so the sort of first thing to realize when you build a bot in the Microsoft Bot Framework is it is a web API. It's not magic. It's a web API. So I think Microsoft have been quite clever about this in the way they've kind of structured how you do a bot in C#, in that it's quite similar to how you might structure your code in an MVC app. So if I kind of talk you through it, so you quite instinctively you would have separate models, controllers, and you don't have views but they have similar things called dialogues,
Yeah.
which are a bit like MVC partials, in that they're like reusable fragments of code that represent this bit of a conversation. Obviously, I know that some of this won't make a huge amount of sense without looking at some examples and looking at code, but hopefully, if you've kind of already had a play, this will help you make a bit more sense of what's going on in there.
Sure.
So, um, so of those three components, you've got to start with, you've got your bot API controller. So the main thing to understand here is the object that gets passed backwards and forwards is a thing called an activity. It contains a message that gets passed from user to bot. So, and you can respond to it if there's text in it. But there was also, I noticed quite interesting, there's specific message types of activity for deleting user data, adding people to contact lists. So to me, that sort of feels like they're thinking a bit ahead and thinking, well, you might want to connect to a CRM system, and these are the obvious hook points to talk to.
Yeah.
But the Microsoft Bot Framework actually comes with its own little mini state store, which is held in memory, or you can kind of plug that into whatever database you choose, SQL Server, etc. So CRM is not a necessity. I think it feels like probably quite a good place to put a lot of this long-term context that we talked about earlier.
Yeah. It's also available for all the other applications and that your business currently runs as well. Then.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not isolated, is it?
Yeah. And then we talked a bit about the sort of dialogue. So the main concept here is dialogue is it's a snippet of conversation. So when a message hits your controller, it gets routed to a dialogue. So that's effectively your view, if you think about it. Yeah. If your API controller is your MVC controller, that will route to your view. So what I tend to do here is it goes to root dialog, just like a main class, which gives the user an intro into the bot. Hi, I'm Edbot, for example. And then from there, you can sort of route the user down the most appropriate branch, depending on what they're saying. So in terms of how your dialogue decides what to do next once it's got the message, the most basic way you can do this is just using a regex or a string match. But here's where I'd sort of recommend the first complementary technology that I mentioned earlier. So Lewis is the Microsoft NLP cloud service. So um, if you use that, it'll make everything a lot easier,
Yeah.
basically. No complicated regex expressions that no one can understand. You just plug it straight into Lewis. Um, you create your intents in Lewis. So effectively, you train that service up. You train it by using things called utterances. So basically, examples of things people might say. Um, so if you want to sort of create a greeting intent, you might put in utterances like "Hey," "Hello," "Howdy,"
Sure.
"Hi." And then whenever a user says any of these things, Lewis will kind of recognize that intent. It'll give you that percentage probability, and then you'll know that that's that's what the user means.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
It feels quite basic at that level, um, but I think the important thing to realize is that actually that is a very basic example. Microsoft out the box will give you lots of different examples to use already that you can just add on.
Cool.
Um, so I was just looking at it on my screen now. So they've got 21 different pre-built domains
Right. Okay.
covering all sorts of different topics, things like healthcare and fitness, booking a taxi, playing and stopping music tracks. So basically, they've given you all the kind of intents for those straight out of the box.
Nice. Yeah.
Um,
It doesn't sound as daunting as I thought it would be.
no, it's not.
Um,
It's not magic.
no, it's not. It's a little bit disappointing that it's not magic, to be fair. But yeah, the way that you sort of compared it to MVC, I think clears it up quite a lot. It makes it very easy to understand and see how those building blocks sort of stick together to get you into your bot building. But yeah,
Yeah, I
it's
think
good.
all the if you build your bot right, almost all the clever stuff sits in Lewis basically.
Right.
So um, so you kind of create lots and lots of intents. And the other thing with the rest of intents is entities that I forgot to mention. So they're almost like variables in your intent. So if you said something like, Edbot, book a flight on airline X leaving between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. on the 16th of November, um, book flight is gonna trigger the booking intent.
Yeah.
Uh, and the rest of it, well, X is an entity, and so is that 8 p.m., 10 p.m., 16th of November. That's another entity. And these things that get triggered by references as well. So um, within the context of that one intent. So almost like you imagine that between, for example, would trigger some kind of time and date entity.
Yeah, so I
Yeah,
guess an example of that is that most people, I would imagine, are going to be using Facebook. That I know when I am having conversations in there, if I mention a date, so I say, "How are you fixed for next Friday?" It will highlight that for me and give me the option to create a calendar event
yep.
or an event in Facebook for that event. And I guess that's the that bot event technology behind there, the element I think you called it.
Yes, the entity. Sorry.
Entity, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the same technology, and I think all the different tech giants are just skinning it up differently and combining these in different ways,
Right.
and calling them different things to confuse everyone. But
Yeah, yeah.
underneath it all, the same concepts apply, and they have to apply because there's no, it's not magic, as I said,
No.
and it all stems from the same sort of research areas anyway.
Yeah. So it just looks
Um,
like there's some room to bring in a standardization there to make sure that things are named in the same or at least a similar fashion.
Potentially, I mean, I've noticed that IBM Watson uses quite similar concept types as Microsoft, but I noticed that Amazon are doing their own thing, so
Sure.
not sure why,
Yeah,
but
yeah. Just to be different.
yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah. If I was to download the bot framework and have a play and I wanted to use Lewis, um, is it expensive for me to have a play around with it? What sort of costs would I be looking at? Any ballpark? I'm not going to be holding you accountable if it comes in and it's more than I can afford. It's
Well,
your responsibility.
well, I think if you wanted to play this stuff, and you didn't already have an Azure account, you can get a free Azure trial, 1 month trial.
Yep.
It's £150 credit you get, or $200. So that's probably the best way to start it off. But a lot of these sort of cloud-based services, they sort of operate on a freemium model. So basically, the first few calls are free anyway.
Yep.
So it's not something you have to worry about too much.
Okay.
I know there are some things that won't work unless you've got an Azure account, that I'll be talking about a bit later. So I haven't kind of gone around the whole complementary technologies bit yet. So I'll carry on going.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely.
So we've kind of talked about controller, dialogue/view, and there's also talked a bit about the model. So obviously it's not kind of been mentioned so far. So why would you make a model? So it's quite a cool technology that Microsoft built into the bot framework called form flow. So just like you can kind of annotate an MVC model to create a web form, the form flow is basically the same thing. So you can create a bot form by creating those similar annotations. So it is very powerful. And to be honest, looking at some of these early bots that have been in the public domain, I'd have thought you could do one of those in form flow in about an hour. It's kind of that powerful. If actually you just build a form, so you can do any validation you like, any custom validation. You can give people multiple choice, so you can give them options rather than getting them stuck on knowing what to say. You can sort of obviously reorder the questions how you like. If you get stuck, you can even sort of go. You can even ask for help as a command for help. So I think that's something that if you're building a bot and it's very simple, that's a good place to start. But probably overall, you're going to want to use a mixed bag to handle different use cases, which I think is what I've been alluding to as I've been going in terms of, well, you might choose a different framework for a different use case, but within the Microsoft framework, there are different styles of ways of building bots which you can use for different use cases.
Yep. Right. Okay. Yeah, that's it's interesting. It is really, really an interesting subject, and with it being so new's not the right word. Young is probably the better term for it. That it is a good time to get involved with it, and I think it is going to explode in the next few years. It is the next cool kid on the block.
Yeah, definitely. There's one more technology I haven't kind of covered it yet, and that is Q&A maker, which I sort of describe as a really, really fast way to develop an FAQ style of bot.
Yeah.
And you can sort of get one of these going in 5 minutes. Literally, I could start it now, and 5 minutes later I'd have it running, just by pointing it to an existing FAQ.
Okay.
So what this does is it will scrape that FAQ for you, and it will build you a list of questions, basically, of things it will understand and responses it will give. And there'll be some sort of NLP happening on the question. And the only real limitation is that you can't really tune that with this technology.
Right.
So if you said, okay, if you had an FAQ and you had a question there that answered what is a bot, you could, FAQ maker would easily extrapolate out to go, well, what's a bot? What is a bot? But if you said, what on earth is a bot? It would probably get confused and not be able to get you the right answer. So you can't really tune it. So I think within the sort of mixed bag of technologies that Microsoft are giving people, I sort of see FAQ maker being something to cover what people call a long tail of questions. So, one of the tips I've got for people building bots is your bot doesn't have to be able to answer everything a user gives it. And if that's your, well, it's an honourable place to get to, but the reality is you're not going to have the time to do it. So really, one of the patterns I've seen a lot of people use is you have a bot that's very good at answering 80% of the questions through intents, whatever, through dialogues.
Yeah.
And then for 20% of questions that are very, very rare, they might use something like FAQ Maker, Q&A Maker to actually handle that. So they'll just have a massive data store with lots of unstructured data that it'll bring back for you if you ask us off the beaten track.
Yeah, so a bit like when you ask Google on Android, you ask them a question. Sometimes she'll come back and give you an answer, and other times you go, "Here's what I found on Google," because they're not quite sure what it was, so just stuck it into Google search and show you the results.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a good pattern. It's fairly expected, pattern. It reflects real life. So if I ask you, James, about I don't know, struggle for example here.
Something I knew nothing about really, or very little about.
Okay, if I asked you about PostSQL and whether that can do encryption at rest, what would you do?
Probably stare blankly at you for a few minutes. I don't know. Ask somebody else, or go and have a look online.
Yeah, exactly. So you go to Google. Going to Google's doing that 20% of things that you don't know off the top of your head.
Yeah.
Whereas if I asked you, I don't know, name me one data type in .NET, you'd know straight away, wouldn't you? So sure. That's 80% of things that you can do without even thinking about it.
Yeah. Sure. Cool. Well, we're just about out of time. I think it's been a really good conversation, and it's opened my eyes a little bit to how the barrier to entry with bots isn't as big as I think it first seems. So thanks for coming on and taking the time to talk to us.
That's fine. You're welcome, James.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for listening to Cynical Developer. I'm James Stoddart, and you've been listening to Ed Yau talking about bots. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help the Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.